Show is
funniest
now
commercial
airing,
of
but
all
we're still muted. So
the funniest commercial of all time is the Abraham Lincoln commercial where his wife turns around and says, "Does this make my butt look fat?" And he goes, "Well,
boom, we are back and just talking about traps that people set for one another, verbal traps that Leroy just tried to set one for me. We won't go into that, but I
oh, we
was
can
too.
go into it."
No, I was too sly for you. That's the thing. I was
No,
too
I
sly for
Well,
I'm
you
all
can
I'm all
also
about it.
put your traps at the gym too.
you.
Gym
Traps at the
measure.
gym.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I don't want any. No, there's enough traps that I probably there's enough things that I could probably say to get me in trouble in life. Just being serious, let alone messing around. That I, man, it's crazy, crazy times in the cancel culture and in the midst of all the protests and riots and hopefully we can talk a little bit about both those and get to some reconciliation things. But here we are off the cuff with Leroy Hill and Jane Pentig. And so, yeah, and actually, a miracle of miracles. You guys can't see this because you're looking at, you don't see the background like I do that's promoing to everybody else. But our cute little people at the bottom, like my guy, and then there's Jane's guy right in the middle, and then there's Leroy's guy who's like the worst looking one because he won't send me an updated one. But
I've already got the avatar done. That avatar is done. I don't,
you haven't sent it to me. I'm all I'm
I don't
saying.
it's done.
So yeah. Anyway, so but magically, that little our little three avatars together is the same order of our images on the screen. So that is like makes me look like a tech genius. But I don't know how I did that. So all right, you guys doing? I mean, all life is crazy. Before we get into some of the serious stuff, any updates? Life going okay? Anything worth mentioning? Maybe a fun, good-natured, lighthearted thing. I don't know. Anything to start this off with before the heartfelt stuff?
I can't think of anything light.
It's a great look on your face there, Jane. Well, Leroy, do
I'm
you want to tell us
trying
about your
to think of-
favorite Abraham Lincoln commercial?
Oh yeah, there's a guy. Yeah, it's the funniest commercial of all time. I mean, it's up there. You know, because Abe is known for telling the truth, and his wife ask him to give her an honest assessment of her figure, and he can't do it because he'd be embarrassed to say, and she'd probably kill him if he answered her question honestly. So that's as far as I'm going to go.
So he couldn't figure it out, is what you're saying.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, even
Yeah.
honest Abe
even
ran
honest
into some
Abe had to
trouble.
pause.
He knows when to take a step back. That's true. All right. Well, I won't go. I won't push that any further, or the incidents which before this, which brought that on. But let's just say, I'm still here and wise beyond my years, not falling for Leroy's trap. So,
No, you can't.
yeah, that's all right.
It's still very interesting that you want to even tackle some of these topics because of the times in which we live.
Yeah.
To tackle them is to during an emotional season,
Yeah.
that we're in is pretty brave. So
Yeah.
it's pretty.
I'm glad Jane stuck with us. The one we did 2 weeks ago. That was her first one. Well, we'd done one before with the three of us, but we didn't have a great connection. So I think it's better now. But still, I was waiting for her every like second until this time the show started. I was waiting for Jane to say, "I'm off today. That's it. I don't want to be a part of this."
Like, I'm on vacation.
Yeah. Every time the show airs with this topic or anything related to race and all this violence and everything, or the peaceful protest or cop violence or anything, Jane's like, I'm out. But she wasn't. So she's a trooper. So I appreciate that. But, I think here's the thing. And I've gotten so far, all positive feedback on the YouTube stuff where we archive this, on Facebook and in some other messages that I've received. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but, I think the thing that we offer is, we're not, we talk about mention politics, but we're primarily looking at these issues through a Christian lens, and I realize that in and of itself is no shield, but I think the hope I get out of some of this stuff is that there's a lot of people looking for answers that will bring reconciliation, which is the angle I want us to get at today. Ultimately, when we talk about, the difference between protests and riots and where those are all at, not a political one per se, as far as solutions to those things, although these are political, cover political ground. So I think it's valuable. But, you mentioned that, Leroy, about the bravery, so to speak. I don't know if that's the word I give to myself in any of this stuff, but maybe boldness. But it's interesting because this idea of the speaking out is not easy to take. I mentioned you guys before. Matter of fact, I pulled in the image real quick. There's a tweet from actor Terry Crews. So Leroy, you know who that is, right? I asked Jane earlier before the show. She wasn't sure. Then, as soon as I mentioned it, she remembered who it was.
I was gonna say every time I try to show my wife how I flex like he does, but I don't get it like I can't do it like he does. I try.
Very few of us can flex like Terry Crews, but yeah,
I need to flex. So buff.
He is. He's a good guy to look at. He's got the muscles and the good looks, but he's got a great personality to go with it. To be honest, his comedy stuff is good. But people know him from Brooklyn Nine-Nine. He's been in the Untouchables with all 3 of those movies with guys like Stallone and Jet Li, and. But he had this tweet. I have it up. Folks watching can see it. You guys can't, but I'll read it for everybody. Terry Crews tweeted out just on the 7th, defeating white supremacy without white people creates black supremacy. Equality is the truth. Like it or not, we're all in this together. So you might be surprised people seeing that like, man, how is that controversial? We're all in this together. And so he got blasted on Twitter. I just read a thing this morning from People magazine, like, stars that don't know they're not famous anymore, or these are the stars we can cancel because they say the wrong things. And I'm thinking, dude, so I actually replied to Terry Crews' tweets. Not that he cares who I am, but you should. Because, I flex too, but, whatever. I'll show you what's up. But I tweeted him actually clips to what I want to show us right now to launch our discussion, because I want to talk about the place of protest in this and the difference between protest versus violence. But I think what Crews, I tweeted 2 or 3 tweets, maybe 3 or 4 tweets at him, where I quoted from this part of King's speech. This one is the 1967 Stanford version of it. He gave 2 versions of this when he talked, and they're slightly different, but basically saying the same stuff. This is from the Stanford version. But he's talking about why there's violence, why they happen, but his stand on all of this. And this is the part that gets misquoted. But I think it's interesting that I think Terry Crews said exactly what King said. And so what's shocking to me is that either people can't discern that or how far we have come away from the vision King had for what the purpose of protest and what the purpose of all this that we're going through is. So I'll start us off with this clip from King. And then we'll kind of unpack that a little bit when we're talking about how as Christians we should respond to this idea of protest.
Let me say, as I've always said, and I will always continue to say, that riots are socially destructive and self-defeating. I'm still convinced that nonviolence is the most potent weapon available to oppress people in their struggle for freedom and justice. I feel that violence will only create more social problems than they will solve. That in a real sense it is impractical for the Negro to even think of mounting a violent revolution in the United States. So I will continue to condemn riots and continue to say to my brothers and sisters that this is not the way. Continue to affirm that there is another way. But at the same time, it is as necessary for me to be as vigorous in condemning the conditions which cause persons to feel that they must engage in riotous activities as it is for me to condemn riots. I think America must see that riots do not develop out of thin air. Certain conditions continue to exist in our society, which must be condemned as vigorously as we condemn riots. But in the final analysis, a riot is the language of the unheard.
Okay, so at the end of that clip, we hear his oft-quoted thing, the riot is the language of the unheard. But we see in context what's really interesting. Obviously, he's talking about riots, or, King was I wouldn't say a pacifist. I don't know if that's the right word exactly theologically to stick in, but he was definitely a non-violent guy in terms of what he approved of in terms of protest. But I think his argument is really interesting. There's a reason people protest, and there's a reason protests often devolve into violence. And I know that this situation we face is very complicated. Maybe we can get into some of the complexities of that in the next little segment. But what sticks out to me in that is what he's saying is, look, when you have a situation where there is violence, an oppressive violence, whether it's motivated by race or just the culture itself or whatever reason, and people's grievances aren't heard, what you get is not just protest, but often protest that goes into violence. So there's a place for protest in what King is saying here. So what do you guys think? What's that place of protest that we as Christians can stand behind? I mean, should we stand behind even, peaceful protests? Is that where do we fit in as believers? What do you guys think?
Take it away, Leroy.
Oh, Jane.
Well, it's very interesting. I've been, this whole thing started. I started reading the book of Ephesians again because I know that book is all about reconciliation, being reconciled into God's kingdom, and then being reconciled to one another, and seeing each other as already having been reconciled, not needing to accomplish it within the church. So I think that we need to divide. We need to really be distinct on what we mean. Are we talking about reconciliation within church between black and white? Or are we talking about reconciliation within the community? Because both of those spheres are going to have two different divergent answers. The first sphere within the church has already been done for us. So I don't need to question your motives as a white person or a Mexican person or whatever you are. If we're believers in the church, because we have the same spirit, I need to listen to you as a brother or a sister. I need to hear you in that regard. But when we get to, we're talking about within the world, that's a whole different set of circumstances. Because
I don't know. I see that as different, man.
Well, go ahead.
No, I just, I think here's the deal is I think the reconciliation that we're granted through Christ is it's what I preached on this last week when I was preaching at a church that did social distancing, so we're okay. And Ephesians 2, and my argument was that the hard work is done. Christ has already reconciled the world to him. Not talking about universal salvation, but the reconciliation was accomplished. The work of reconciliation was 100% completed at the cross of Christ. We still have to go and do the hard work that's in line with the good work, the works that have been prepared for us before the foundations of the world. So I would say that, so already, although you're right, there's a difference, between brothers and sisters, the three of us as believers. We are reconciled. That reconciliation accomplished in Christ has been fulfilled because of our statement. But even as we reach out, my thinking, the way I approach it is, they have already been given, the work of reconciliation has been done. We just have to do the hard work of preaching that hope of reconciliation. That's all. That's true.
That's true, but they're going to be approaching this term of reconciliation from a totally different context and set of concepts than you and I are going to be, approaching that reconciliation. Sure. So if I were to have a frank conversation with you about race, or another believer about race, I'm not going to assume that from the outset that their responses to me about accountability and personal responsibility have anything to do with, some latent racist motives. Mm-hmm. I'm going to assume that that's my brother or my sister saying to me, hey man, there's something that needs to get worked out. So I don't want to get off the topic, but my point is...
Yeah, we'll get to more of that a little bit too.
Yeah, I don't want to get off it, but my point is that conversation, I think, is going to be a little bit different than people in the world, because they're not, as I would say, they're not vibing in the same way as we are. To talk about forgiveness and all these other sorts of things and preach reconciliation from a biblical standpoint, It's totally going to be foreign to people who are seeking vengeance and who are seeking, uh, uh, redress of rights. Even the redress of rights may not
Yeah,
allow.
and that's where we get into that reconciliation piece. I think that's the
Yeah,
tougher part is what's the purpose of these things when we do
yes, that's a good
protests
question.
or
That's the
riots.
way to.
Yeah. Jane, where are you at? What do you think on this as you listen to King's thing, and what's your thoughts in terms
I
of
know
where we stand?
there are Christians going out there in the protest, and I think it's because they want to give a greater hope to people. I don't think they're exactly doing what the other people are doing, but we're reconciled to God, and as ambassadors of Christ, we are to share the gospel so that others can be reconciled to God. And so, if Christians protest, as long as they're not doing it in sin or causing violence, I think we're okay.
Yeah. Do you think there's you or Leroy, but do you think there's a moral imperative that we should protest as Christians? Is that the right way? I mean, is that something that, that there's a work we should do that compels us to do that more than just it's okay? Is it something we should say, yes, we
Or
need to do that?
and or
Not a
is it
command
based?
necessarily, but are we morally obligated to stand with those who are maybe being, unheard and subjected or oppressed or whatever kind of label we want to throw on it?
I guess I would say it'd be by conviction and what the Holy Spirit wants for you. I mean, some people could, fight for injustice in other ways. They don't necessarily have to go out there and protest. And so I don't think you have to. I think it's something that, God gives you a choice to do.
It's a good.
On that.
Well, I mean, I am just approaching it from, I don't want to strike hands with a muddled message.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? I don't want to be engaged. I don't want to lend Christ virtue to a message that is not clear and one that is muddled. I don't want to do that because that doesn't accomplish anything except to drag the church into into an area that it cannot extricate itself from. So if the idea is to go out, let me just say it this way: there are a lot of other groups. One is in the church to start its own, Black Lives Black Lives Have Meaning group, and then let's go protest with that because the message isn't muddled, right? It isn't muddled by being attached to an organization whose views are hostile to Christianity, right? So why doesn't the church do that? Why does it have to go out in the streets with people who are whose message is certainly hostile to good
Leroy,
moral order?
if you could fit it on a sign, I know yours would read, Black lives have ontological significance. I think that's what.
People might get confused by that too. Like, what is that?
They would, but we want to be. I just think that I want to be clear about what I'm protesting and who I'm protesting with. I don't want to lend virtue to an organization that has none. I'm adamant against it, and I'm radically disappointed that so many churches and so many leaders of churches have tied Christ to Belial. That's exactly what they've done. So the thing, Black Lives Have Meaning and Black Lives Matter, no decent person disagrees with the fact that Black lives have meaning and they matter. No decent person disagrees with that truth. But the correlation in the construction of words is so tied to that organization that I don't see it. Why? It's fallacious to say that people aren't confused by it. I get emails and messages all the time from people who are absolutely frightened that the pastors that they love are intoning a message that is hostile to Christianity. I get that. I wish I could put them out here for people to see. They are absolutely frightened by this. They wonder what happened. So, I'm not against protest, but I am certainly against, a muddled message.
Yeah. I think that's a good point that we need to be aware of. I think we have a moral imperative to do some good work in the midst of this, do some hard work. If I'm consistent with terminology, the good work was done in Christ. We do the hard work of, some way taking the gospel to this world and, God's kingdom here on earth kind of thing. In some way we bring that into presence in the world, to make a place where that's manifest through the church. I mean, through the church, we have to do that. So I don't think what's that?
No, I was going to say, I remember you were teaching a class one time, in the ethics class, and you raised the question.
Student. Oh wait, it's this way.
Yeah.
I can't point through Jane's head. Jane, I'm pointing through your head right now. People but I'm sorry. I don't mean to. It looks like I'm actually poking you in the head, but I'm not. I'm actually pointing to Leroy. Yeah. So
you
sorry.
raised a profound question that has resonated with me ever since, and that question is, who is the church obligated to do good toward, primarily? And I've been thinking about that for quite a while, and I think that we're letting, in joining this group, we're letting our good be evil spoken of. You know what I mean? These are tricky times, and we need really mature people who are thinking about these issues in a way that in the end we're not going to regret it. And I don't think that we're being terribly deep here. But that question, who are we primarily to do good to, is involved. And if we're going to get involved with the protests and where the world is going with protests, should we be doing it the world's way? Those are good questions that we should ask. This is a unique time for the church. The church absolutely has a golden opportunity to show the rest of the world what reconciliation really looks like. Absolutely what it looks like. That it's already been accomplished in us. Has a unique opportunity. But I think our leaders are absolutely blowing it. I just honestly do. Not all of them, but many of them are. And they're leaving good people bewildered by the decisions that we make.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point there. That I think our greatest obligation is to reflect the name of Christ, to make sure the gospel is proclaimed with clarity, and that it leaves room for the Spirit to bring the conviction that He's going to bring. And so I think we have, if our conscience says go and protest or do those things, I think we have to be cautious to do it in such a way that brings the focus on the gospel of Jesus Christ as the solution to the real world political problem, not a denial of those problems. And that's what King, I think, drives at. I think King's whole point is that, when he's talking about violence being the language of the disenfranchised or the unheard, he's saying that, look, this is not the ideal, but it's what happens when people aren't heard. And there's a legitimacy, whether it's institutional systems that have, created disparity for some reason or another, and that's a whole other show. But just granting that exists because we're in a broken and fallen world, we need to make sure that our solutions, they will touch on political things, but we don't become politicians or Republicans or Democrats. We're not those people, So, what do you think, Jane? Am I going to get in trouble for anything so far from your students?
I think you're good.
As long as I'm good with your students you work with, I guess we're okay. Well, let's transition a little bit into the riot side of things, because I think we're all agree, and I think most Christians that I've heard, I don't know anybody that's opposed to standing on a corner or in solidarity to show support and love to those who are feeling broken and hurt and all that kind of stuff. I think doing it with moral clarity is key, but in principle, we don't have to do it that way, but I think if we're called, do it, But now we get into violent protest, and I think that's a whole other issue as believers that we do. So I want to show this clip. This is actually from the LA riots. This clip is 1992, and it's interesting. Okay, I clipped this and I posted this on my YouTube channel so I could have clarity, because I put at the bottom of this, LA riots, 1992. It spans the entire length of the clip. Do you know how many people that comment? This video has now had like almost 60,000 views since I posted it 5 days ago, or whatever the heck it was, or 6 days. And how many clips are saying, I can't believe people are doing this right now? It's like, okay, it's 1992. And then I actually had a guy correct them and say like, hey, this happened like 5 years ago. This isn't right now. I'm like, okay, in correcting them, you can't even correct them properly. It says like right in the thing, 1992. So I don't know what to make of the world we live in when we can't read like, it's less than a tweet, people, come on. But so I've said it, I've made it clear, this is not a current guy responding to, but this guy's heart, man, my heart breaks every time I watch this, and I've seen it many, many times now, having clipped it and put it up to use for us here. And you know, I think his heartache is what we see in many in these communities that have been savaged by rioters, of the you know, minorities who live in these communities that have to get their medicine and that are going through this and having their stores burnt down that they put their life into. I don't think that circumstance is any different, even though it's all these decades later. So here, let me just throw up this clip, and hopefully people can hear all the stuff.
It's not right. It's not right. It's not right what y'all doing. I came from the ghetto too, same as all of you did. Y'all need to listen. But you know, y'all mess up my business. And you call it black power. You mad at the white man? Why destroy my business? Why destroy my truck? Why steal my computer? I'm trying to make it. Could you understand that? Can't y'all see it? I'm trying to make it. Just start listening.
All right, we're back. Man, that's tough to hear him say, you know, why burn down my store? Why steal my computer? Why do my, and it's just like, and then they go to this clip of this lady. I mean, it's not probably his store, but she's stealing all these clothes and stuff like that. It's just heartbreaking. What was your response, Jane, when you first saw that?
It is painful. I mean, like, he was talking about how hard he worked to get out of his situation and to have everything he worked so hard for to just be destroyed. It was painful. You could feel his pain as he's just like crying in the streets.
Yeah, that's hard. Leroy, what about you? What are your thoughts when you see something like that?
I think when I first saw that video, I watched it like, I would say like, because you know it's a minute, less than a minute, like 20 times to listen to his words. And he said, "Did you see it? Did you see what I built with my own hands? Did you see all the hard work that I've done that you destroyed? Why burn down my business? Why steal my computer?" It is just, you know, sad. And that's what rioting does. It doesn't hurt the people you intended to hurt. You know, in Ferguson, when they burned down, you know, all the stores, the new Walmart, the CVS, or all the stores they built, you know that those stores never came back. They never came back. So all those people who could easily walk down the street or 2 blocks to get their medicine now have to get on buses to go across town. To go to the grocery store, you can't do that anymore. And it's senseless. It is senseless. And no amount of injustice can justify it. None can justify it. You've ruined people's jobs. You've ruined the way that they support themselves and their families. You've ruined their opportunity to move out of the situation.
Yeah, well, and think about that too, Leroy, as you're talking about that too. I mean, how many people, you know, we talk about, you know, the idea of passing on an inheritance to your kid. This guy, in that particular case, but in many cases, they worked up from nothing. He's like, you know, I came out of the projects. I came out of, you know, all this stuff, and this is what I built. And, you know, that's something, man, that's a guy could have given to his sons or his daughters or whoever, and then they would have had a leg up for that next generation to stay out of poverty, to stay out of whatever circumstance that they might otherwise fall into. And so you talk about a generational legacy that was also destroyed. It's something like that. And I don't think that's really I mean, the media is the media, and I think their goal is to prop up politicians and to maintain their own power base. I'll include Fox. I don't care who they are. I think pretty much I throw them in all the same basket at this point. I stopped watching TV news years ago, but I read the news, but I don't watch it. But I don't know. It's just heartbreaking to think that to try to say violence somehow is an honorable approach to, injustice. I think as believers, we have to realize that is not it. This kind of violence, indiscriminate violence especially, I mean, all violence is maybe questionable and not ideal for the gospel, but, even if you're not a pacifist, but, you just say, okay, this is just indiscriminate, but man, there's real people being hurt. The ones you claim are being disenfranchised by the culture and oppressed and hurt. How does that help them? How does that help? I don't get it, and it's heartbreaking.
I heard a guy one time say, he said, whenever these groups come at you, they say black power, but you know what they're really saying? They're really saying, give me what I want or else. And that's exactly where the rioters are coming from. The whole idea of rioting is that you're in a deficit position and you don't have what you think that you need. And your goal at this point is to destroy what others have so that they can feel your pain, so that you can get what you think that you need. So rioting for them, for those who agree with it, is a means of getting what you want, which is power, which is really power. It's coming to the group that you think owe you, or coming to the group that has what you want and saying to them, I'm going to destroy what you put in my neighborhood to help me, so to help families in my neighborhood, to give us opportunities. I'm going to destroy that so that you can give me what I want. I think another author said that what we're seeing in all of these riots are people who have not grasped what it means to be free and independent. And they're grappling with that idea. Because to be free means to be free to succeed and to be free to fail. And he said that we haven't really wrestled with what we're wrestling with, what that really means. And I think in many ways he's true. What he says is true.
I think the riots, and this is, I think, King's point too, and I think, I mean, even in Cruz's tweet, we get it. If it's just one power overcoming another power, eventually when you defeat that power, now you're the one in power, and it turns just as ugly. It never resolves itself. But what we see is that the King's approach was to say, let's recognize that commonality we have as human beings created in the image of God. And if we recognize that, we're going to fight for each other, even though we have external differences. We'll fight for Jane, even though she's a woman and I'm a man. I'll fight for Leroy, even though you're a black dude and I'm a white dude. It doesn't matter how we're different on those things. If I say each of you are created in the image of God, then if you're being oppressed, then I recognize I'm being oppressed. And
exactly.
We have to recognize that. So if we go out and use violence like looting and those sorts of things, let's just assume it's not a complicated group of people where there's anarchists out there and KKK people out there and just people who are greedy out there. Let's just assume that everybody has righteous motives. Just
for the sake of argument.
Just for the sake of argument. Even if you do, you're hurting other people who are made in the image of God. You're actually defeating the purpose of why there's protest to begin with. It's just to recognize our common humanity and the genuine oppression that's happening against some segment of that humanity, which we need to speak out about, which we need to fight against, which we need to do. But by hurting, people that are in the same situation, I don't see how that gets any real political answers. It gains power for people, but I don't see that it gets answers. I struggle to see that.
No, I think that you're 100% right. And what you lose is you lose moral force. You lose moral force. King's movement had moral force because every picture showed what those who are oppressing them, they showed them for what they really were.
Mm-hmm.
Every time you've seen dogs biting people, biting women, and fire hosing people, and people lynched, people were seeing the opposition for what it was, and they were looking at King and those who followed him, his followers, as nonviolent, who were saying, we just want to be treated equally.
Mm-hmm.
And the moral force of it overwhelmed everyone. I remember reading just recently how when these images made it over into Europe, and then the Europeans were saying back to the Americans, what is going on in your country? People had to do something.
Yeah, we're asking the same question.
It's happening right now.
But now when they're showing the rioters and looters and burning and beating and killing and murdering people, I'm looking at it. You know what I'm saying? Where the heck are the cops at?
Yeah,
you know why?
That's a good lead-in. Let me show this
my heart is with those people who are being abused.
Yeah,
really.
Let me show this other clip, man. It's just about a minute long, but this one comes. There was a police chief, and he was dealing with a situation where rioters came in and caused problems, burning down a building. But I'll let him get to it. But just like that gentleman in the LA riots, his heart. I love his heart. The heart of this police chief dude is just crazy. But check this out and hear what he has to say about some of the consequences of the rioting and looting.
Last night, protesters intentionally set a fire to an occupied building on Broad Street. This was not the only occupied building that has been set fire to over the last 2 days, but they prohibited us from getting on scene. We had to force our way to make a clear path for the fire department. Protesters intercepted that fire apparatus several blocks away with vehicles and blocked that fire department's access to the structure fire. Inside that home was a child. Officers were able to help those people out of the house. We were able to get the fire department there safely.
So that's heart-wrenching. Hey, before we do that real quick, we do have a comment online. I'm just going to share here. It says that, basically MLK wanted equality. He didn't want to be treated better. He was saying for white children and black children to hold hands together, not hurt one another. And I think that's the approach. But very, very true, I guess. But to back to this video, man, you see this baby that could almost die. So how is it justice? Mm-hmm. And again, assuming it's legitimate protest, just assume all that for the sake of the argument, and assuming there's legitimate police brutality, and assuming it's racially motivated, just, across the board. Let's just assume all that is true. How does setting fire to a building where, families are living and babies are at, and then stopping the fire trucks from coming in to save the baby, how does that advance the goal of reversing oppression? That's what I don't, and on the news media, there's just so little reflection and thoughtfulness because they're so worried it's about which politician. I'm disgusted, quite frankly, that most of it, how is this going to hurt Trump in the fall? How is this going to help Biden in the fall? How is this going to hurt them? I could care less about any of those conversations. And to be honest, those make me more angry than anything else because you realize that's what all that matters. And they're only going to show the images that advance the particular political goal. And we're not really having a discussion what's happening here on the streets.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know what to make of those things.
I just think that we're framing the questions wrong. Just like you just talked about, the questions aren't left or right, Republican or Democrat. They are just. What is justice? When we say justice, what exactly do we mean by justice? Do we mean righteousness? When you say my experience is that when people say equality, really what they mean is equity. There's a difference. Equality means that we have an equal opportunity. Equity means that they want equal outcomes, and there's never going to be equal outcomes. If I were to play LeBron James in basketball, the outcome is assured before we get on.
Wow. I can't believe you just called him out saying you could defeat him.
Now, if it came down to like intellect and like handsomeness,
Well, yeah,
Like,
that's true.
I'm just saying. But the point is,
But if we had cartoon Leroy against cartoon LeBron, your one right now
yeah,
is sad, and you
he's
would
like, you
lose.
said equal outcomes.
there's not going to be an equal outcome if we got on the basketball court.
Yeah, just because I made your cartoon guy and my cartoon guy, don't expect equal outcomes, Leroy. That is not oppression. That is just the fact that, you know, I only have so much to work with when I'm building one off. Yeah, you know.
But that's really what they mean. Okay, I want to say something. If you were to look at statistics from 2000 to today, 20 years, and you could look at prison statistics for 18 to 19-year-old men, black men, down 72%. 20 to 25, down 62%. 26 to 33, down 53%. And that's over 20 years. If you were to look at black people's progress in the last 20 years, whether it's education, wealth, graduation rates, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If you compare black people then and black people now, we're doing 1,000,000% better across the board. But here's the real issue. If you compare blacks and whites in 2000 in prison rates, there's a 10% gap. Now, if you compare the prison rates today, it's an 18% gap. Now, here's the question. Has there been no progress? Or is the comparison wrong? The comparison is whether blacks are doing well from 20 years ago to today, not blacks in comparison to whites. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I'm just saying that when we talk about disparity and disproportionality and all these things, I'm just not sure we're using the right metrics.
Yeah, and that's a good conversation. I know we've broached that before over the show over the last few years. I don't want to go too far down the stats thing because I get why. I understand. I've spent so many hours, countless, way too many shameful hours looking at critical race theory the last couple of weeks and putting together some stuff, all the conversations I've been having about that, but and ignoring other stuff I need to do. But and I get why what you're saying falls on deaf ears in that for those who have bought that, even amongst Christians. But let me ask this related to the riots itself. Now, because I've heard this. Have you guys heard this? You know, Jane, have you, you know, when politicians say that, you know, they're sort of like Trump or whoever, any Republican or whatever, has criticized the rioting and looting. I've heard a particular response. What kind of response have you heard? We didn't ask about this. So I don't know. Maybe assuming you're reading those things. Have you read anything about that, or can you speak to that? What the kind of you've heard is the response? You know, in reply to that?
Oh, is it like almost like they're going to like, well, let's talk about black on black crime, like those kinds of things, instead of dealing with the situation and kind of looking at more of the problems that are going on instead of just head on, let's talk about the riots. Are those the responses you're talking about?
Well, that's some of it. I mean, I guess I've seen, let me tell you, I guess I'll just ask what I'm thinking about and you tell me if you've heard this too. It's like, I've heard whenever, like say certain Republicans, again, I'm not speaking politically here. I think there's power issues at stake here, but these just happen to be what I've heard. It's even generally white people saying, okay, hey, but riots are bad. And actually, you know, Trump saying we're going to stop the riots, but the protests are right, you know, that kind of stuff. I've heard that criticized because they say, well, you're just trying to minimize the pain that people are going through, and you're just, you know, it's basically saying that's a racist comment to try to make a difference between the rioters and the protesters. Have you guys heard anything along those lines?
Well,
some of your
it's kind of difficult for me to see it as a racist concept because it assumes that the rioters are all black. You know what I'm saying? It assumes that the rioters are, and we all know from the images that the rioters are not all black. As a matter of fact, the makeup of this whole deal it's got to be shocking to everyone because it's black, white, all across the spectrum. And when they try to make it a racial concept, they are being racist in and of themselves by insinuating that the person means that there's all one monochrome colored people out there rioting and burning, and it's not.
Yeah.
It absolutely
It seems to me like this is just a political game being played for the most part.
Yeah.
Whenever a certain politician or a certain skin color person makes the comment that, hey, these aren't all people. There's the Antifa's in there or whatever. Oh, you're just being racist. You don't care. You don't care about the cause. But yet people are happy to say, okay, the KKK's in there, or which I probably think is true too. I think the KKK is happy to go in and foment disorder and bring violence to the communities they'd love to burn down.
Yeah, all 10.
Well, whoever's left, and if all 10 of them are left, then all 10 would go.
Yeah, no, I don't think so.
I think it's a mixed.
I know that they've been trying to muddle, exactly who's all engaged. First of all, I haven't seen any reports that have nailed down who all has been involved. I've heard from Bill Barr say he named Antifa. He did name left and right anarchist groups who are engaged. But I mean, I haven't seen any reports that that it's the KKK burning down. The KKK is burning down Saks Fifth Avenue.
Yeah.
I mean, I thought it just anyway.
So, hey, let me interrupt real quickly. We have a comment here, and I haven't seen this commenter before, but I'll throw it up. And I'm not sure I fully understand it, so I asked him to kind of maybe clarify that is. I'm curious what his question is. Maybe we can address it. But here's what it says. It says it's also racist to assert black people have the same values. I don't know if it means as white people. I'm not sure what that means.
No.
Do you guys have an idea what that means?
Yeah, that's. Hey, Richard and Rosalia, how are you guys doing?
Oh, okay, you saw that. Okay.
Yeah. No, what they're saying is, and this is the kind of talk that is going on behind the scenes, is that every time these issues come up, there are a list of demands. There haven't really been a list of demands other than defund the police. But the question is, if, like you said earlier, if we're really all in this together, right? And this is our country. We love each other. If one part of our family isn't doing well, we all suffer. Now, if I lived next door to you, Joe, and I was throwing trash outside of my window, and it was not just falling on my lawn, but it was going onto your lawn, as my neighbor, you would come to me and say, is there anything I can help you with? Can we do something about this? Now, maybe I don't understand that throwing trash out the window is bad, but if I want to be a good neighbor, I should listen to you. Listen to the demands that you have of me of being a good neighbor, because we live next door to each other. I mean, our fates in some ways are tied to each other. If I keep throwing trash out of my window, your property value of your house is going to go down.
Yeah.
And when you go to sell it and they see all the trash in my front yard, who would want to buy it, right?
Yeah.
So you have some stake in me living in a way that is respectful of you. Now, what they're suggesting is that in all of these conversations that have been had over the last 50 or 60 years, no demands have been made for the people who come and want whatever to clean up their own backyard. Because if you make that command, you're a racist. If you make that demand to change, you're considered a racist. This is what happened to Daniel Patrick Moynihan when he released the Moynihan report. They called him a racist because of just observing what is going on in a particular community. So what they're suggesting is they assume that everybody has the same cultural values, and what they're saying is that we don't, and it's quite possible that we don't have the same values.
Richard affirmed that. He's saying yes, exactly. He actually put it far more succinctly though than you, Leroy, in one of his responses. So maybe he should be on the show instead of you. But he said basically it's the idea that all blacks don't think the same way amongst ourselves. It's the idea that there's a black thought, a black morality that's going to lead to something, and that's what he's saying is also a racist in that assumption about that. Yeah, I think. Sure. This last clip I want to show in this little section here, I think is interesting. There's one of the community activists here that was interesting because this is why I clipped this. I thought this was so fascinating. If you have somebody saying, hey, look, it doesn't matter if you're black or white or Asian or, whatever you are, if you're rioting and looting, this is not the cause. You can talk to George Floyd's brother who's made statements about this. This is not what he'd want. All these people, the mayor of Atlanta talked about this stuff. But when somebody else who's a political enemy says the same thing, in the media, it's treated as if like that's a racist statement. And that's what we have to realize too is the problem here. So I wanted to show this clip from a local guy here in San Diego who's making this point to distance his movement, which is peaceful protest, against the riots. And this is important we understand. Making that distinction is not an attack on, the legitimacy of the purpose for the peaceful protest. And it's not an attack on, quote unquote, all black people or all these other things. Let's just listen to this clip real quick. And I think it helps make that point.
Many within the black community became concerned that their message was hijacked by the looting and violence.
The buildings that you see behind me have been burned down by those who in fact do not represent the black community and in fact do not represent black leadership in this region or in this country. And I want to immediately at the outset of this news conference say that we do not back up or support the looting and rioting that is going on.
Oh, dead air. That was terrible. I clicked the wrong thing and it was like dead air just frozen. And that's like, good thing we're not actually on a radio because that would just be the kiss of death. But yeah, what he says is interesting. Jane, were you saying something about the clip on the break? I heard a little bit, but I hear his audio coming in and yours, so sometimes I can't hear everything. Did you have a thought on that clip?
He was just saying this doesn't represent our community, right? It's that clip.
Yeah, it's that clip. Yeah. I thought that was powerful. Did you have any thoughts when you saw that one? And you're watching the news. Well, I'm assuming you're not, or at least reading the news like everybody else. You've seen the images. What was your response to that kind of a statement? And he's not the only guy to make these, but
I guess he's saying there's some people who are doing these things, but it's not representing what they stand for and what they believe in. He wants to make the distinction between, their community and the people that are ruining their communities.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think that's a fair distinction. It's not racist to say, the violent protests are out of line for and harm the cause that pretty much there's been unanimous agreement, from all peoples that something needs to be done, about our circumstance. And I don't know. I thought that was really refreshing, to be honest. I don't know. Leroy, what about you?
No, I certainly appreciate that message. Imagine having a protest that doesn't set you back 10 years. It doesn't it doesn't harm the people involved and actually seeks to address their interests. I mean, we may at the end disagree, but at least you haven't harmed yourself or anyone else in the process. And at least you get your issues heard. I'm willing to deal. I'm willing to sit across the table with a guy like that, even though in the end we may not agree. I'm willing to listen to that guy and to hear what he has to say and to really, see if there's a way that can, that can be helped. I mean, if we really, like I said, these are our fellow countrymen who we may agree with and disagree with, but if they're hurting, we owe it to them to listen to them. But I think
that leads to our last little segment I wanted to look at here, and this is what is the goal of reconciliation as we approach this? And I want to use this clip from Mr. Woodson, who is I'm not sure how old he is now, but he was a guy who was active in the protests in the civil rights movement in the 60s, and he walked away from it because of the race baiters, as he, in his words, the people that are using, people got mad at Trump for holding up a Bible as a prop, which I don't care. I mean, I don't care. I don't care if they held it up. It doesn't inspire me about him in one way or the other. It mostly is a political prop. But I think even just as offensive are people holding up as props people in the black community and dehumanizing them as nothing but props to advance their political agenda. And Woodson is a guy I think that's been aware of this. And matter of fact, this show, I kind of did a fundraiser on Facebook. If you're on there, I think they have the idea of, we recognize there's wrong, we recognize there's a way to do it, but there's a goal that they have that when I heard him speak, I haven't heard others speak of it this way. And so I want to show this clip because I think Mr. Woodson has an excellent perspective on this in just about a minute of a clip.
People cannot get to the stores now. and they're crying out, and they're saying, when everyone goes home and the cameras are gone and the civil rights grace-wreathing celebrities, have done what they have done, low-income people are the ones who are suffering and they will continue to suffer. I left the movement because I realized that many of the people who suffered most, poor blacks, did not benefit from the change, that their demographics was used by some of those leaders. It's more class than it is race. Yeah. And so they used it, and now race is being used to deflect attentions away from the failures of people running those institutions. And if we continue to look at life through a racial prism, when evil wears a black face, it will escape detection and therefore correction.
I started the thing again, man. I'm like, that's twice in a row I did that. All right. Man, I think his last line of that is so incredibly powerful. He said basically this idea when we use race as a shield for these things, and we use it as a prop, essentially is what he's talking about. When evil wears a black face, it fails detection. Mm. Man, that is so powerful coming from this guy. And I think as Christians, our goal, and I think this is, I don't know Woodson if he's a Christian or not, but it seems like his goal is this idea that, hey, like I'll go back to Terry Cruz's tweet because he put it in a tweet. We're in this together. We have to overcome the injustices that are being done. We have to acknowledge them. We have to do something to speak out. We have to do something practically to make changes systemically, structurally, the way we do things. But if we think it's purely just about one person of one race versus another race, then we're wrong. It's about, for us Christians especially, sin and evil and wickedness that can wear any skin color. And right. I don't know. I mean, he just does such a good job sharing that I just, that's why I dedicated the show to trying to raise some support for his group. What do you say, folks?
We need to end with a hopeful note. Is that where we're going with this last one?
Yes, I want to end with a hopeful note. Yes, exactly.
Well, he's representative of the idea that we hope gets forwarded at the end of this, that we don't need to be enemies. Mm-hmm. That the war that some want to perpetuate does not necessarily have to be fought by us. That we can actually sit down and talk and see, how we can help each other, and that, I think that's the ideal that I grew up with as a boy, and later into manhood. That my goal. I don't have enemies, and I don't hate white people. Not even you, Joe. I just
well, you do, but not because I'm white, just because I'm mean to you.
No. But I think that is a hopeful
brother.
Yeah, I love you too, man. I hope that's a hopeful message.
I try to hug you like I poked you earlier, but that could be taken as sexual harassment because Jane's in the middle. So I want to be careful to not violate that sacred space.
It's kind of scary. Yeah.
Yeah. I think we're getting a lot of yeses and exactlys and all those sort of things. Just in comment to that here. Yeah, I want to get in. We're getting close to the end. Man, time has went by. I want to put in this last clip because I think I do want to end on a positive note, not just what he said, but I think this illustrates the problem that we have with the violence that is justified, with the mistreatment of some people. This clip shows, it's interesting. We have a bunch of white protesters who target and attack a black cop. And I filtered out the language because I wanted to show it on this. You can, I kind of bleeped it out or whatever, but there's a script. I put up some words on the key words that he does say that I think are really helpful here. So check out this last clip, and then let's even though it's this, let's answer this question. I think this points out the difference between what we is arguing as Christians, the purpose of protest and riot being reconciliation. What I think the world sees as because you can dehumanize one group, they justify, to give power to one group. I think they allow dehumanization of another group. Even in this case, if it's white people dehumanizing a black man because he's a cop, he no longer has to be treated as a human. And I think this is the danger that Christians, we need to be aware of. So here, let's watch this last clip.
Where's your white cop friend?
And then I close that clip with a woman holding her middle finger up towards a cop, a white woman holding her finger up to a cop. And then I ask, is this what racial reconciliation looks like? Is this what it means to deal with systemic racism, when we can say a white person is justified telling a black cop, get out of here, you effing, and then call him the N-word? Is that really, that's okay because he's protesting what happened to Floyd? I honestly, I actually know why people think that's okay, but as a believer, this is just crazy that that's somehow justified. What were your thoughts for you guys? And then I have a question for you in a little bit from a reader, Leroy, but I'll get some thoughts from either one.
I got him right here from Joe, but yeah, that is, you almost think that that there's something more. This is not really about black people. You'd almost think that this is not really about helping black people in the end. That there's something else going on here, and that's where you talking about there's some deceitful things that are happening. This is not about a pro-black movement or raising up the plight of black people if it allows you to dehumanize black people at the same time. There's something else going on here, and I think it's political. This is about political power, and this is people using black pain for political power. That's exactly what this is about. I mean, don't you think it's interesting that the same people who are aligned on the left and the right are aligned on opposite sides in this whole debate? I mean, it's a political power thing, not an uplifting of black people thing at all.
Yeah. Jane, any kind of thoughts for you on that? Putting you on the spot. That's
that. Yeah. When we were talking about Black Lives Mattering, but he is a black man, and is it because he's wearing a police suit now his life doesn't matter? So maybe people are just picking and choosing which black people matter. Right. If you don't agree with them, you don't matter anymore, which it's like, I thought we're looking for equality for all people, but when you don't like what they're doing or you don't agree with their positions, now you're like devaluing them and you're dehumanizing them, and you're saying these are the people that mattered. So that's just like really sad. Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to watch those things and reconcile that with what the claims are when you watch media about that stuff. I got a question specifically here for you, Leroy, but and I'll summarize. For some reason, I can't get the show up on my screen here. I mean, on the screen everybody's going to see, because I think it's real long. So I'm going to kind of summarize it here. This is from Joe, not me, Joe, but a viewer. He says, question for Leroy. How do you think people can best, quote, listen to the demands of the fellow countrymen during this time? And I think his real concern, as he kind of explained that, is that, when we're approaching this from two very philosophically different worldviews, how can we really hear each other? So that's an easy question, and you got 30 seconds.
Okay. The reality is, because his framework is obviously Christian to Christian. That's why he brought up Job and Nehemiah. Is that James says that we should be quick to listen and slow to speak. Listen for sure, but speak we must. And how we deal with each other is we always deal in truth. One side definitely wants to shut you up and re-educate you. Well, you need to resist that. I mean, you need to resist that. But how do you resist that? By not defending yourself and speaking the truth in love consistently. I mean, that's my answer. I have a longer answer after this. I will tag you on the what I think is going on here. But yeah, I think that's the 5 cent version.
Yeah. Well, and Joe, in response to you, Leroy said Jane did a great job in her comment. So I think I don't think he was snubbing you personally, but it could have been. But I wouldn't blame him. But anyway, no, he did post about Jane. He appreciated your comment as well. So
Make me feel left out.
yeah. So Jane, let me just ask you real quick, and we're actually 6:04, so we're a little bit past our time. But I do want to ask you this because you've been doing some of the discussions of critical race theory, and you know that that's a different philosophical worldview that I think guys like Joe are bringing up. So how do we do you have a pearl of wisdom, a nugget of wisdom from some of the conversations you've been having? How do we begin that conversation when we're starting from these radically different frameworks? And trust me, I'm taking notes while you talk.
Well, I think we need to understand the different positions, like what is the Christian position, and then what is critical race theory's position. And I have a great friend who you can learn a lot from. Her name is Monique Duson.
Who
you can look
had on the show last week too.
So go check out her stuff because she's actually trying to equip people on how to have these conversations. So I think she'd be the best person for that. So I'm just going to punt over to her, head on site and support her ministry because she's really trying to do this from a biblical worldview where, we really need to unite because the other positions are not uniting people. They're actually tearing people apart.
Yeah. Last thing I'll say is just that I think that is a hard thing. And that's actually why I've spent probably 20 hours in the last week just actually trying to put together. I'm working with a bunch of leaders here from several different campus ministries. This guy's putting it together. And what we just talked about today is we're going to do a 7-week thing. And I have a framework that I think will work for, let's start with some points of agreement. Let's do this thing. And I've got like 150 slides that I have on this thing. And it's not about just content that I put together, but just images, questions to try to help us get to a place as Christians we can figure out how to detangle ourselves from this worldview, this critical race theory worldview that I think is harming the gospel, yet value the things in the culture, the lives that are being harmed, the legitimacy of the concerns that I think sometimes they rightly make good observations of some of the problems, their solutions. It's like a doctor says you have cancer. Now let me take a sledgehammer and clean it out. Okay, that's what I think critical race theory has done. They've made some good diagnoses here and there, but their solution is take a sledgehammer to something that needs a targeted, precise surgical response. And so that's kind of my take on it. And I'm going to be having these conversations as well. Monique, I'm listening to some of the stuff Monique is doing with Theology Mom. She's doing a great job with those sort of things. And I know there's several others having those conversations. So our goal is reconciliation. That's where I think we need to close with on this as Christians. Our goal is not equalizing power or taking power from one group to the other. Power in and of itself is distinct from authority. Right authority is corrupted by power, because power. So it's not give people more power. It's that we all should set aside our power, serve one another, and then work towards this idea of respecting the sacredness that's in us all. I mean, that's the short version of it for me, at least. And that's where we have to get to. So I think we'll have more conversations about this. I don't know that next week I don't have any plans to talk anymore about race and protesting. I think Jane's done with these. So I maybe am too. These are hard conversations, but I'm hoping more people will have them. What's that, Leroy?
They're exhausting.
They are. They're exhausting to prep for, and they're exhausting to do. And because I know that there's so much, people can be hurt with just a careless thought or word, and we've tried. So I appreciate that. I appreciate all you guys watching. Check it out afterwards. We'll have the archives on YouTube. It'll go up at morethancake.org, and I'll have this video archive and descriptions and stuff. Feel free to share that around and use it as a framework for more conversations. So thank you all for joining in. We appreciate you coming off the cuff with us. And Leroy, Jane, we'll be in touch soon, and we'll be back on soon. Again, thank you guys for taking your time as well. God bless you guys.
God bless.